The difference between being forgotten and being remembered lies in three simple social adjustments. No one invites someone who seems closed off, even if they are a good person. Imagine a typical Friday night. The phone screen lights up, Instagram opens, and the first story that appears is of a group of acquaintances, all together, laughing while sharing a pizza or chatting in someone's basement. And the detail that hurts the most: the invitation never arrived. Or perhaps, think of that agonizing feeling that hits right at the lunch break. That moment when the safest alternative seems to be grabbing the tray in the cafeteria and heading straight to the back of the library, or even hiding in a bathroom stall scrolling the feed endlessly, just to avoid the pitying looks for eating alone in the middle of a crowded cafeteria. It is an exhausting and lonely cycle. Watching the best moments of others' social lives while being isolated makes the feeling arise that there is a manufacturing defect. It is like carrying an invisible neon sign saying, "Keep your distance." At these times, the mind creates traps, and it is incredibly easy to jump straight to the worst possible conclusion, faithfully believing that everyone hates you, that you are too weird, or your true personality drives people away. But the truth behind loneliness is much less dramatic, and fortunately, totally reversible. The great reality is that there is no secret plot to isolate someone. The problem is not that people actively reject those who are alone, but rather that social dynamics work on a kind of autopilot. And understanding how to break this autopilot in the minds of others is the first step to coming out of invisibility, getting back on the radar of any group. There is a very common psychological trap for those who face loneliness daily. The mind begins to whisper that there is something fundamentally wrong, creating the illusion that the people around harbor a secret hatred or gratuitous antipathy. But it is fundamental to understand the crucial difference between active rejection and passivity. Active rejection happens when a group actually decides to exclude someone due to real disagreements. However, in the overwhelming majority of cases, what occurs is the purest passivity. Colleagues are not conspiring in the hallways to leave someone out. They are just living on the autopilot of their own routines, consumed by their own problems. In the frantic pace of everyday life, between running around campus, work shifts, and the expectation for weekend events, such as fraternity parties or tailgate gatherings before American football games, those who do not make themselves noticed inevitably end up blending into the scenery. And this is exactly where the cycle feeds itself. Upon noticing this absence of invitations, the emotional survival instinct kicks in. To protect oneself from this supposed rejection, the habit of withdrawing even more is created. An invisible armor is raised as a defense mechanism. The big problem: that this defense transmits extremely sharp subconscious signals to the outside world. The silent message that reaches others works like a large and shiny warning sign asking for distance. And people, who almost always also deal with the fear of rejection and their own social insecurities, simply respect this imposed limit. It is perfectly possible to have an incredible personality, be loyal, and have a great sense of humor. But if this barrier is not broken down, all this potential will remain the best-kept secret of the place. To change this dynamic and finally get on the social radar, it is necessary to deactivate three behavioral alarms that usually push away any attempt at approach. The first of them is immediate, visual, and, ironically, the one that goes most unnoticed by the person who commits it. Imagine being in the break room at work, or in the hallway waiting for the professor to open the door to the large college auditorium. Social anxiety attacks. Almost by defensive instinct, headphones are put on, arms cross firmly in front of the chest, and the gaze instantly dives into the cell phone screen. For those who are experiencing this, it is only an attempt to look busy and not show vulnerability. The heart may be racing, secretly wishing that a colleague would strike up a conversation about the exam that just happened, or invite them to grab a coffee at the campus Starbucks. But that is where the first big mistake comes in that cancels any chance of connection. the invisible barrier of body language. What the outside world sees, completely different from the emotional storm going on in the head of someone suffering from shyness. The people around do not have the ability to read minds to understand that rigid expression, often known as the famous resting bitch face, is just nervousness and insecurity. To others, a slouched posture, the total absence of eye contact, and a closed expression transmit a single and sharp message: please do not bother me. And the human being, by nature, avoids the discomfort of rejection at all costs. If someone looks like they are going to respond with an annoyed sigh or with disinterest, no one will risk breaking the ice to extend an invitation to go bowling on Saturday night or grab a hamburger after work. It is a cruel and extremely common paradox. Often, the isolated person ends up being labeled as arrogant, cold, or too good to mix in, when in fact, they are just terrified inside. The body screams for everyone to stay away, while the mind begs to be included. Disarming this body language does not require anyone to transform overnight into the most extroverted person in the fraternity or the center of attention in a conversation circle. It is about small mechanical adjustments. Taking off headphones when sitting in common areas, keeping the head slightly raised when walking through hallways, and softening the tension in the jaw by appearing receptive. The dynamic changes. However, merely appearing accessible does not completely solve the problem if, deep down, there is an unrealistic expectation that invitations will fall from the magical sky of popularity. This complacency hides the second silent mistake that turns potential friendships into dead ends. Stop and think for a second, with total honesty. When was the last time a genuine invitation to do something came from you? When was the last time you sent a message inviting a colleague to grab a coffee, do research in the library, or play some online games on the weekend? For those who spend a lot of time isolated, it is incredibly common to develop the mentality that friendships should somehow happen by magic. One keeps waiting to be rescued from loneliness, as if someone were going to knock on the dorm door or stop at the office desk with a perfect and irrefutable itinerary for Friday night. But social relationships work exactly like a two-way street. If the effort always comes from only one side, the road ends up being blocked sooner or later. If colleagues take the initiative the first few times and find only passive responses or no future reciprocation, the perception created is not that you are shy or anxious. For them, the message is of pure disinterest. If you never return the invitation, people simply assume that you do not care about their company at all. The logical reasoning in the other's head is very fast and practical. If he wanted to hang out with us, he would have called us back sometime. And so, without any fight, drama, or declared rejection, the invitations simply dry up and disappear. The harsh reality is that carrying the weight of an interaction alone is exhausting, and no one wants to be the only one investing energy in a potential friendship. Taking the first step can seem terrifying, because the fear of hearing a lame excuse or appearing desperate for attention usually paralyzes any attempt. But inviting someone does not require the organization of large events. Asking a colleague to share pancakes at the city diner after a long shift, or casually asking if you can join someone who all seems out of place, alters the entire power dynamic. It shows reciprocity and real interest. However, even getting the posture right and taking the initiative, there is a much deeper emotional trap that drains any newly formed connection. But before diving into this mistake that sabotages the best beginnings, tell me one thing. If you have ever hidden in the bathroom during lunch or felt completely invisible in a conversation circle, leave your like on this video. Knowing that there are other people going through exactly the same situation is the first step to not feeling broken. Take the opportunity and subscribe to the channel, because if you want to understand how the human mind works in everyday interactions and want to stop being left out of weekend plans, we are building together a practical guide to mastering these social dynamics. And if you want to learn the shortcuts to becoming a truly magnetic person, remembered by everyone around you, check out the link I left in the description to access a complete training on the psychology of friendship. Now, returning to what pushes people away for good. There is a cruel paradox in loneliness, especially when anxiety and depression take over. It is exactly when you need friends the most that it becomes incredibly difficult to make them, and unfortunately, to keep them. When finally someone reaches out, invites you out, or shares a seat on the college bus, an overwhelming need to be understood and heard begins to overflow. After months or years of accumulating anguish in silence in your room, it is easy to confuse a simple social encounter, like sharing a portion of French fries in a diner or watching a game in the dorm, with an intensive therapy session. And that is where the third mistake, that of the heavy aura and negativity, sets in for good and ends up crushing the fragile connection that was just beginning. Every human being is attracted to lightness and positivity. In a world filled with stressful end-of-semester deadlines, job demands, and family problems, friendships serve mainly as escape valves. They are the pause the mind needs to laugh and recharge the energies of an exhausting day. When someone monopolizes conversations on the first outings by pouring out childhood traumas, complaining about ex-friends who abandoned them, terrible teachers, or exuding constant bitterness about how the world is unfair, the emotion in the air changes drastically. The person listening does not feel honored by your trust right away. On the contrary, the person begins to feel anxiety, guilt, and the crushing weight of your problems all at once, creating an extremely dense aura around you. It is not about faking unrealistic happiness or wearing a perpetual mask of perfection. However, it is fundamental to understand the right moment to share difficult parts and open wounds of a lifetime. Venting deeply is a privilege of those who have already built a solid and lasting foundation. If the initial interactions turn into a recurring source of anguish instead of distraction and joy, other people's brains begin, instinctively, to associate your image with these tiring and unpleasant feelings. The direct result of this overload, in the next events, your name simply slips off the guest list, not because they secretly hate you, but because the dynamic has become too heavy to handle on a Saturday afternoon or during a lunch break. To reverse this whole scenario and ensure your name reappears in Friday night messages, it is necessary to adopt a new posture focused on small practical attitudes, which we can call the rule of self-invitation. The idea here is not to force a radical transformation and try to become the most popular student on campus overnight. The big secret to overcoming social anxiety is to start with baby steps. Try, for example, softening your facial expression and smiling a little more when crossing paths with acquaintances in the hallways or while waiting for class to start. If you notice there is another person sitting alone in the library or looking out of place at an event, take the initiative. Approach casually, make a light comment about the environment, or simply ask if you can share the table. Better yet, create your own low-risk opportunity. Invite just one or two colleagues to grab a quick coffee on the corner or to review the material for a difficult exam in the dorm. By taking control and making the first move, the thick wall of invisibility is immediately broken. However, for this entire strategy to work in the long term and not seem forced, there is a fundamental principle that supports any healthy relationship. As the ancient philosopher Lao Tzu well summarized, when you are content to be simply yourself, without comparing or competing, everyone will come to respect you. Accepting your own personality and understanding once and for all that, even doing absolutely everything right, some people simply will not sympathize with you, is what takes the weight of the despair for approval off your back. It is liberating. And when the urgency for attention decreases, your natural essence finally gains space to attract the right people. Now, after managing to break this initial ice, take the first step and sit at the table with someone The next great and terrifying obstacle is usually the fear of those long and awkward minutes of silence. Knowing exactly what to say to maintain the interest and fluidity of the moment is a skill that separates casual acquaintances from great friends. And that it is exactly why, in our next video, we will unravel a practical and foolproof method to maintain infinite conversations and never run out of topics again, even with people you just met.